The Lion King musical is the highest grossing production of all time in theater or in film, taking over $10 billion worldwide. It won 6 Tonys. It is a spectacle of music and dance. Back in 1997, Disney put their trust in Julie Taymor to create the stage production, which ended up being a very wise choice on Disney's part. And to talk about the history of this musical and her own life as an artist, it's a great joy to say that Julie Taymor joins me now. How are you?
I'm great.
When you got asked to do this, you hadn't seen the original animated film.
No, they asked me and I said, you mean the cartoon? The animated cartoon? And they laughed. I mean, I think they were shocked I hadn't seen it. And I was just busy. I was doing lots of things. But when I did see it, they sent me, a video. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I think it's one of the best Disney animations. It's so exciting. And it was that stampede that was the turning point for me to go, yeah, I've got to do this, because what a challenge.
So
Yeah.
you saw that, and why is that the scene that said, okay, I want to do this?
Because it's so not theater, because it's impossible. And then I have this, as you said, I've been in theater since I was 7 years old, and I've traveled the world way before The Lion King. In Indonesia, I lived there 4 years. I lived in Japan. I was in South America, Latin America. And I've seen theatrical, not just puppet, but mask traditions from all kinds of traditional classic theaters all over the world. And so all of those techniques, I knew I'd find a way. You sort of start with a piano roll, and all of the wildebeest are painted teeny on a back piano roll going down. That's the wide long shot. And then in front of that, looking towards the audience, is a big rolling barrel with small, about 12-inch sculptures, relief sculptures of wildebeest that go in this direction. And that in 18th century theater, they would make waves that way. They would turn the big barrel and the waves would go over, and you create this highly stylized theatrical theater, visual imagery. It looked like hundreds and hundreds of wildebeest. And that was fun to figure out. That was enjoyable.
I want to pause here, because even for people who still haven't had a chance to see this yet, and even when you do get a chance to see it, it still kind of catches you off guard, because you're used to the cartoon, you're used to the animated movie, and then what you're sort of not used to is someone coming out being a giraffe, operating a giraffe, but is very clearly a person. I can see the person who is operating the giraffe. So I want to ask you about something that you call the double event when it came to making this. But first off, do a better job than me at explaining that, which is not hard to do. Do a better job in explaining to me that what people see when they see these puppets that are also people that are also...
The double event is simultaneously seeing a lion head sitting on the top of the actor's head. The actor is made up with the personality of the character. And then they are able to be, like, for instance, Scar, he's vertical, but he has a cane. And in traditional African theater, tribal theater, often the villagers who are performing these rites or these rituals or performances, they will have sticks, just plain sticks that represent the other 2 legs of the 4-legged beast. They don't need to have it be hairy and have claws and do all of that. They can suspend their imagination and know that we are acting as a lion. And so for a lot of the characters, the double event is actually wearing the mask on the head, but being very consciously exposing the human face who is doing the language and who is acting out the part. But you get the physicality of the lion. And when they get angry, Mufasa and Scar, they lean over, and we have a mechanical device that allows the mask to bend forward You see the confrontation. So you go from the vertical of the human being to the horizontal of the lion when they get ferocious and violent. I was inspired. I went to Japan and Indonesia when I was 21. I had a fellowship in visual theater and experimental puppet theater to Eastern Europe, Indonesia, and Japan. I was going to spend a year in Japan, but I went to Indonesia first and ended up staying 4 years in Indonesia and having my own theater company of Javanese, Balinese, Sundanese masked dancers and actors. But when I did go to Japan, somewhere in the middle, I had already been very aware of a wonderful, highly regarded puppet form called bunraku.
Yeah.
Which is, if you're, first of all, women traditionally were never allowed to be the puppeteers or the singers. It's a male form, and it takes 80 years to become the true master. But what is spectacular about this form is that 3 people manipulate these puppets that might only be 4 feet tall, and they're all in black. And you're watching the puppet, which is an inanimate object, right? It's a carved wooden head. Sometimes it has incredible mechanics, so the mouths can open and the eyes can turn and horns can come out or whatever. But you're watching the puppet move like a human, but it's a puppet, and we know it's a puppet. And those 3 puppeteers in black disappear. They disappear because the puppet has been animated with life, has been given this incredible sense of life. And that's what we do. I'm not doing bunraku. First of all, 80 years is a bit long, and we only have 2 or 3 months of rehearsal. But what we have is this appreciation of the art of making theater. This was important to me. If I'm going to take it from a 2D animated film, we need to do what theater can do better than film.
Right.
Not better in the sense of being totally enveloping, and the idea that you can appreciate the story and the technique simultaneously, that they're both rich experiences.
Did they ever break? I was just thinking that there's like 250 puppets, very, very intricate apparatus. When you were getting I think Minneapolis, right, was where you started working on this first.
Yeah.
You're not doing a once a year sort of performance here. It's after year. Did things ever break? Did elephants ever break? Did giraffes ever break while you were on stage?
Well, not that the audience would be aware of too much, but in the beginning, for instance, again, the big lion masks, because the actors had these little operational mechanics where they would press a button that was in their hand and the mask would come forward and come back. Until we refined it, that mask could come back and smack the head of the actor, John Vickery. I always felt so bad. He was the guinea pig on this new style of puppetry. Things would break, but we always have a great puppet maker backstage.
Did the Disney people, given that this was their big famous IP at this point, the Lion King, which had, sort of like Lion King, and I think Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast, sort of like saved Disney animated at that point. When you went in and you said, this is the kind of thing I want to do, it's not something that's probably been seen on Broadway before. Were they on board right away?
Well, they were looking for a way to do this.
Right.
So how do you achieve this animal? It's an all animal world. But this idea of it being humanimals, which is what I wanted, is really what is happening. Obviously, the language and the words and the personalities that are coming from these animals is totally human. It's like Aesop's fables, or it's like any of those tales that we put onto animal stories that have nothing to do with animals, really. It's our projection. We use those to tell our human tales. They didn't know what to do. If you asked Tom, I was a solution. Wasn't that I was saying, would you let me do this? This was, how do we do this? If you were to reduce The Lion King, one poetic concept of what is it about, it would be the circle of life. It would be the journey of Simba going out and coming home again. You'll find it in almost all of the design. You'll feel that circle penetrating. It's a unifying principle for me as a director and as a designer. Is it, we're not there to make on stage a realistic looking savannah. We're not there to do that. I'm not saying everything in The Lion King is a circle, but it is the thing that helped Richard and myself decide, well, what should the set be?
I'm struck by a couple of things there. So throughout this conversation, you kept coming back to the idea. I mean, you've referenced so many types of theater and cultural expression from around the world. You mentioned that you went to Indonesia, which was supposed to be for 3 months. You ended up there for 4 years. I was reading about. I was actually hoping you might, if you don't mind, you tell me about that, because I was reading there was some sort of initiation ceremony you saw when you were in Indonesia that had like a very profound effect on you. What was that?
Yeah, it was in Bali. Well, the one that had the profound effect on me wasn't exactly the initiation ceremony for the young boys happened that week.
Yeah.
And that was extraordinary. But the thing that really had the profound, that really moved me, was one night during this it was an entire initiation ceremony for a week for the young men to become part of the community. Many religions have that, bar mitzvah,
confirmation,
many,
sure, yeah.
Confirmation. So this is their coming of age when they go from 12 to 13 or 13 to 14. And it was a very, very distant village called Trunyan at the foot of this big volcano that was alive called Gunung Batur. And I found myself sitting under a giant banyan tree, the kind that has the roots in the ground going on. It was unbelievable. And it was a full moon, and there's no electricity in these villages. It's candles and oil lamps and that propane. And in the middle, and it was quiet, except that you could hear gamelan orchestras, the kind of percussion gamelans from different villages overlapping. It was just beautiful, distant sounds. But in the far end of the courtyard, all of a sudden, I saw moonlight bouncing off of mirrors, glinting. And out of the dark came 20 or so old men. There was nobody. They couldn't see me. I was in the shadow. There was no audience. And they came out with spears and full barras, which is warrior costume. And it felt like an eternity, but it was probably a 20-minute dance with their expression, with their vocal expression, singing. And it was ferocious. And at the end of the dance, all these old men who had been standing up and were so powerful, as soon as it was over, they all bent over and became their own age again and walked off. And I was floored. These men were dancing in the dark. They were dancing truly in the dark. The moonlight was bouncing off, but there was no light, there was no audience, there were no critics, there was no money.
Yeah.
It had nothing. It was done for their religious purposes, but for me, it's almost like a prayer back to nature. It was something very profound for me, watching these men dance for no we would call Western gratification.
I think I understand. You had come up in theater. You mentioned you were in theater since you were 7 years old, and the construct of theater quite often and is exclusively an audience comes in, whether they're paying or not, to sit down, and you're performing for an audience, and your show is for an audience. And then you are raised with that, and then you travel to Indonesia, and you see a theater performance, a theater ritual done not for any of those reasons. For spiritual edification.
Done for God.
Yeah,
done for God.
Yeah.
Now, God can mean anything you want.
Yeah.
I'm not a part of organized religion.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there is a higher spirituality that as we call it, the what is it called? The greater angels, the better angels of us, that if we could find those little better angels and shove them out into the space, that will be a much cleaner, happier, successful, and safer environment. World. And that's what I felt, this kind of dedication of performing. Beautiful. It goes on and on and on. I found same kind of thing in Japan and other places where the rewards were not the same rewards that you get in the West. I often would say when I grew up, I would read the New York Times, and we used to have the arts and leisure page.
Yeah.
And I would comment that why is arts next to leisure? They don't have anything to do with each other. Arts are fundamental, should be the fundamental arts page, which are the arts are how we exist with nature and with each other. And in Indonesia, where there was both modern theater in theaters, you know, with lighting and all that. I was in Jakarta. I had our actors in my theater company who had done contemporary plays, Greek plays, Shakespeare, all of that stuff. But the traditional theater that I was describing to you just now, that goes way back as part of a tradition of giving back to nature.
I can tell you think a lot about this. So I ask it in that spirit. When you are borrowing from sacred or very culturally important cultural traditions or theater traditions or dance traditions or music traditions, and putting them in a show like
I'm
The
not
Lion
doing
King.
that. I'm not borrowing. There's no borrowing.
I think you can tell that I'm struggling with the language here, but I think you know.
Yeah.
I think you know.
But this is a big contention and has been for the last 20 years or more, which is appropriation and borrowing. That is not what we're doing in The Lion King. First of all, we have Africans who bring their own tradition to The Lion King. Lebo M, the composer, his work is featured up there, equal to Elton John, if not more so, because his work is also in Elton songs. The designs of the costumes and the masks are mine. If there is inspiration from patterns from I forgot the name of the kind of fabrics that you have in Africa, that's true, but those aren't African masks. It's imagery that is filtered through me and then comes out from me authentically as an artist. I was aware of this back when I was 21 about borrowing or appropriating. I never did traditional or classical Indonesian theater. But techniques, let me just put it this way, I firmly believe, and I have for the last 40 years, belong to the world.
I was sort of using the word borrow against using the word appropriate. I was using the word borrow as sort of a more generous version of appropriating, but
it's now still not right, because borrowing is like, can I borrow that and bring it into my house? No. That's like kit and caboodle, borrow.
It's allowing for inspiration.
Inspiration. I think if you think about stories in the world, myths, all of them, they traveled. They come from far, and they change with the person who's retelling it or telling it in a new way. Now, there's a purpose to be frightened of appropriation and borrowing. I agree, because too many people whose cultures have been ripped off have not had the chance to deliver from themselves, from their heart and their talent, their own stories. But as an artist, I think what is really important is that you don't just pick up and do it, but that it lives through you and comes out in a fresh, hopefully more an original way to you. My collaborators, Garth Fagan from Jamaica and America, Lebo M from South Africa, and Elton, and we are from different places, and we brought our traditions together to make The Lion King.
I can tell this this kind of conversation means a lot to you.
It does, because I think people are putting unnecessary censorship upon themselves and not allowing the freewheeling expression of, if you want to tell a story, tell it. If you don't tell it well, that's bad. But if you tell it well and it touches people, it doesn't matter where you come from. How many stories have been written by men about women? Are we going to just dismiss all of Shakespeare because he's never been to Rome or never was in Italy or never, it's just nonsense. What we should be looking for is the common thread that we share as human beings and celebrate the differences. But we should be we are such a divisive world right now that is what's tearing us apart. I mean, it's just unfortunately the worst part of what's going on.
And I'll echo what you said before. You know, there is also a history of inspiration not being named. It's also important to name those who we get inspiration from, and we get inspiration
Right.
from various places around. These are not necessarily groups that have always been named, have not always been talked about. A lot of productions happen where no one said, "Hey, I got this from this place," or "I got this from this place." You know,
I got it. I was inspired from this place.
I was inspired from this place.
To say I got it, that is the problem. You've got to, because listen, I am inspired by Bunraku, but when I read in the press, she uses Wayang Kulit, Bunraku, you know, that is not true. Wayang Kulit, which is the original leather shadow puppets with the oil lamp that tells stories in Indonesia, shadow puppetry, the original shadow puppetry. I don't use their stories, and I don't use their puppets. I do shadow puppets with leather and sometimes oil lamps and sometimes electric light. Now, that technique of shadow puppetry is in Turkey, China. Ombre chinoise is from France. It is a tradition of technique that's gone everywhere. The stories that they tell are very local, or they're telling the stories that are part of their culture, and that is meaningful. That is very different. So I do really firmly believe that techniques belong to anybody. You can use, we've got movies that have been made all over the world, but that technique of making films, I wouldn't say it belongs to America or France where it was invented. I would say it's a form of expression.
I understand your point very, very well, and I understand why it means so much to you. And I appreciate you pointing at that the idiosyncrasies in language there are important, and I appreciate your point of view there. I really do. I want to talk about how all of this ended up coming together. So we talked about how it was a risk for. There was no other way to do it. There was no other way to take an animated film and put it on stage in this way. They couldn't figure out how to do it, so they bring you in, and then you have these beautiful inspirations, and you have these ideas, and then you develop it, and then it actually has to go on stage in front of an audience who had never seen it before, who were probably deeply familiar with the animated film.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel that first night? How do you feel that first night when people are about to see it?
So we had all of us, the performers and the producers and the artists, the team, had seen fragments of it in rehearsal. And it was pretty awesome, even rehearsal, to see people up on giraffe stilts, you know what I mean? And that these hyenas and all, and you know, it was all very, very fun and overwhelming in the rehearsal room, but not until we were actually in Minneapolis on the stage did we know what we really had. We didn't know. We didn't know what the reaction would be. And it was shocking. The screaming, the excitement. It was fabulous.
But what was your reaction, though, on opening night?
Just what I said. I broke into tears. I was ecstatic and I was overwhelmed. I was like, what? You know, it was so exciting. It was thrilling. We knew we had something really, really special. The other thing I want to say, you know, we're talking about 27 years ago, before Hamilton. We cast with I felt strongly about this. We cast the principal lions with African Americans or Africans, and 90% of the cast was of color. So think about that, where the king is Black, young Simba is Black, Scar wasn't. Scar was a white actor. Disney doesn't talk about this, and you'll probably being asked to cut this. I have no idea what you'll do with this material, because this is something that is so meaningful. When you ask how I felt on opening night and saw many African-American children and families in there seeing something like this for the first time that was not about racism, had nothing to do with race. Nothing. You know, at that time, if it was Ragtime or Jelly's Last Jam or Duke Ellington, you know, that would be about African Americans in social situations, which meant it would be social and political. This wasn't. This was just tremendous talent. And I felt for white people, it doesn't matter the races, but for Black people, it was extraordinary. This feeling was immense for me. and immense for the actors in the show and for the audiences. So that's a part of the Lion King experience that I think is much to Disney's credit, and how we were able to put it together that made something that was this multicultural and multiracial at the same time, all to the benefit of telling the story.
And a story and a production that has gone on almost 30 years now since it first opened. Why do you think this story has connected for so long?
Because I think that there are these myths and these stories that are the same no matter who you are, wherever you are. Coming of age is, as we talked about in the beginning, is a common experience. It's the shared experience. I grew up studying mythology and folklore in college. Anthropology, shamanism, the early, all why and how art is created. And I think that The Lion King is such an essential story. They always said it was Hamlet, whatever, because Shakespeare also wrote stories that could be told all over the world and everybody gets them. I mean, some of my favorite Shakespeare is Kurosawa, the Japanese, a fantastic filmmaker who did Throne of Blood, Macbeth, or his King Lear is beyond phenomenal. He's made it his own. It's his own through Japanese style and technique, but the story is relatable all over the world. The Lion King is a fable. It's what we use to grow up, tell stories about how do you deal with death? How do you deal with disease? How do you deal with enemies, with violence? It's got all of the major lessons, which is what art has always been there to do, which is to take people through the rough, tough times, the passing of a father. We have 4-year-olds who come in. Did you ever hear the story about this family that came to The Lion King in New York? Well, it's one of the most moving things that I ever experienced on The Lion King, which is, when we opened in New York, it was very hard to get a ticket and you had to do it way in advance. And a family from the Midwest ordered their tickets. They had 2 children, probably both of them under 10 or 11, boy and a girl, and months in advance. And when it came time to come to New York, the older daughter died of a sickness. A friend of mine had told me this story. And the parents weren't sure that they wanted to even come, but they were encouraged to come because of the child, the boy. So this is the story I was told. I wasn't sitting in the seats next to them, but I was told this, that when Simba, the little Simba in Act 1 says to Mufasa, "You'll always be there for me, won't you?" The little child looking up into his eyes and says, "You'll always be there." And Mufasa takes his hand, he points to the stars. He says, "Look at the stars. The great kings of the past look down upon us from these stars, those stars. They live in you. They live in me. They're watching over everything we see." So in a stunning song by Lebo, the child is understanding that even if his father dies on a physical plane, he will always be there. At that moment, the little boy in the audience turned to his parents and said, "Sarah is with us, isn't she?" Now, that's what I'm supposed to do as an artist. That's it. Okay, I'm glad it made a lot of money for Disney and me. And then it lives and lives and lives and lives. But if that happened to that one family, that song and that experience and those puppets and that story by all these artists helped that family get through the darkest moment.
Yeah.
We have done what we were supposed to do.
It goes back to that story you were telling me about seeing theater that was done for a purpose, about of God, and of God being our best selves that we present to others. And I understand why that was so powerful for you. I see it as the culmination of that moment that you had in that moment.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely stunning work that I'm so grateful I got the chance to see, and I'm grateful I got the chance to talk to you about. I really appreciate your time, and congratulations on it. 30 years on.
Thank you so much.